Welcome, everyone. I'm Professor Christopher Jane Miller, and I'm joined here by my wonderful colleagues. You see a lot of them here, and my collaborators and co-organizers in this endeavor, Marie-Hélène Gorsay at University of Birmingham, and Tine Wekemans at Ghent University. Wherever they're appearing on your screen, they're here for me. We are so happy to kick off this first event on Jain art for the 2024-2025 Dialogues in European Jain Studies speaker series, Connecting Around the Globe. This is the second year we've done this speaker series, and this year we're focusing on European scholars, but European scholars who are around the globe and European scholars who are working with other scholars around the globe. So we might go to India, for example, maybe Canada later, who knows? Let's see. There are lots of surprises on the schedule, so please check it out. And so a couple housekeeping items before we get started with the event. There is a Q&A box, not the chat box, the Q&A box where you are welcome to put in your questions and comments for the speakers as the event is moving on. You can do that. And following both of the talks, or I should say really all three of the talks that you're going to see today, we're going to have a Q&A discussion during which you can interact with and ask questions of the speakers, and that will be moderated on our end. And we really look forward to your wonderful participation. One quick thing before we begin. Not long ago, October 11th, our dear friend and colleague, Anand Vaidya, passed away. Some of you may have seen this. Anand was not a Jain scholar per se, but he was a good friend and colleague who was interested in Jain ideas. And he was a visiting faculty member at Arihanta Institute. Marie-Hélène and I worked with him. Tine knew him. We are really, really sad about the loss of our dear friend and colleague, Anand Vaidya. And so just at the beginning of this event, I would just like to ask us to take a moment of silence. And if you're comfortable doing so, just close your eyes and give good thoughts for Anand. And maybe after the event, you can light a candle for him or think about him more. So just a moment of silence. Thank you all for joining me in that. And once again, maybe after the event, light a candle for Anand, have him in your thoughts. Wonderful person, wonderful colleague, and a great loss to all of us in many ways. So as we begin this event, what I'm going to do now is hand it over to my colleague and collaborator and co-organizer, Marie-Hélène Gorsay at the University of Birmingham, who's going to introduce the event and the speakers. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for this, Chris. Yes, so without so much of a transition, it is a real pleasure actually to be back with you for yet another exciting lineup this year. As Chris introduced a bit, our dialogues in European Jain studies have diversified a lot. We have been connecting indeed around the globe, so much that some may wonder about the relevance of the mentioned Europe even. Well, I think it's a vibrant sign that contemporary research is largely done with international collaborations. And today's session shows this particularly well because and it shows how scholars travel worldwide, because it so happens that all our participants are from the European continent, although they now spread more globally. So to begin with, it is my very great pleasure to introduce my friend Basile Leclère, who is lecturer in Sanskrit and in Indian Literatures at the Université Jean-Moulin Lyon 3 in France. Basile's works is notably anchored around the Moharājaparājaya, which is an allegorical drama depicting the conversion to Jainism of an important king, King Kumārapāla, a Caulukya king from the 12th century. And from these works, Basile really works on various projects in Jain studies, in the aesthetics of Sanskrit theatre, including the architectural science depicted in this plays, and in the history of medieval India. So Basile has kindly accepted our invitation to preside this session that will assess how some of the frontiers of aesthetics in Jain studies. But before I give him the floor, let me very briefly introduce our two speakers. So first, another very good friend, Sasha Restifo, who is Bhagwan Mahavir Assistant Professor of Religious Studies at Florida International University. So she's currently working on a book which will be titled The Theatre of Renunciation, Emotion and the Self in Medieval Jainism, where she explores some implications of the Jaina focus on emotional regulation, and notably in Jain dramatic works. So today she will speak about a topic that I'm particularly excited about, which is aesthetics and philosophy. The rasa of knowledge in Amrita Chandra's Atmakyati and Kalashas from the 11th century. And last but not least, Anna Tosato, who is Bhagwan Munissuvrat Swami postdoc research assistant in the Department of Religion at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and whom I cannot wait to meet in person very soon, by the way. She studied the Indian traditional scientific treatises, the Shastra, on performing and on visual arts. Her research focuses on performing art and on artists in classical and medieval India. She has a special interest in the way those relate to temple buildings and to sculptures. So today she will speak about the representation of performing arts in early Jaina sculptures, a case study from Mathura. So very much looking forward to it. And Basile, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Hélène, and thank you, Tina and Chris, for asking me to be the chairperson today. Admittedly, I am interested in many forms of Jain art, architecture, sculpture, painting. I'm more specialist of Indian literatures, but well, I will do my best to chair this very interesting panel, because today we have the pleasure to listen to two papers dealing with Jain art from, I think, complementary perspectives. And I'm sure that the speakers will enrich our understanding of Jain art, which is a much needed task, considering how long it has been eclipsed by Hindu and Buddhist arts. Indeed, the study of Jain art per se seems to have remained for a long time quite confidential, even though the pioneers in South Asian art studies paid some attention to it. For instance, the edition by Richard Cohen in 2003 of Ananda K. Kumārapāla's essays on Jain art shows that this renowned specialist authored about a dozen papers on the topic with a special interest for the illustrated Jain manuscripts. Similarly, C. Sivaramamurthy included in his vast book on Indian art published in France in 1974, consideration on and pictures of Jain paintings and sculptures, but significantly in his chapter on gods in literature and Indian art, he mentioned the Tirthankaras, but incidentally at the very end of the chapter, without presenting them under a specific label, as he did for each of the great Hindu deities or for the Buddha. As for the groundbreaking presentations of Jainism authored by Helmut von Glasnap and André Guérino, they focused on the history and doctrine of the religion and considered the Jain art, but briefly, through the lens of the cult. Admittedly, there were scholars from within the Jain community who produced reference books on Jain art and iconography, such as U.P. Shah, but I think that their audience remained quite limited. Fortunately, since the end of the 20th century, the number of exhibitions specifically dedicated to Jain art has increased at a steady pace. And as a matter of fact, behind Chris, you can see the display of the exhibition that took place in Switzerland 1 year ago, I think. And the catalogs published at the occasion of these events have brought to a broader audience not only arrays of wonderful pieces of art, mostly sculptures and paintings, but thanks to the seminal papers that precede the presentation of the items, they have also highlighted how this art is imbued with the Jain perception of the world. Jain mythology, cosmology, ethics are thus encapsulated in any piece of Jain art. And as a piece of art is produced in a given social context to be used and enjoyed by certain people in certain circumstances, there is also necessarily a Jain theory of aesthetic experience underlying each of them which validates their usage. What may have been an important cause of the relative invisibility of Jain art and theory of art for several decades is the fact that Jain artworks and treatises were actually informed by techniques and concepts developed in a broader Indian context and shared by other religious communities. For instance, as demonstrated by the late Madhusudan Daki and also by Dr. Alka Patel, the Jain temples from medieval Western India were described in the same treatises as Hindu and Muslim shrines and presented only slight variations from a general model, which accounts for the fact that any religious building from that time could see its affiliation modified in the course of time. It is even difficult to postulate the existence of Jain artists, as we know the Jain communities employed craftsmen also working for Hindu, Buddhist, or Muslim communities. A famous instance of that paradox is the fact that the Western school of painting, once labeled as Jain, because the style was mostly exemplified in Jain manuscripts, also encompasses manuscripts of other texts like the Hindu Bala Gopala Stuti, a collection of stanzas praising the young Krishna. However, the Jains undoubtedly enriched the artistic tradition of South Asia with their own specific conceptions and may have even played a pivotal role in some major evolutions over the time. I would like here to quote Sonia Ri May's paper from the exhibition catalog Victorious One's Jain Images of Perfection. I quote, "The use of the human figural icon of the Jaina as a focus for veneration was a potent part of Jain practice from an early period. The Buddhists followed suit during the 1st century CE with the formulation and spread of the anthropomorphic image of the Buddha." So as regards the cult of anthropomorphic images, Jains were, according to her, the first to develop that in the broader frame of Indian art. That Jains should develop such brilliant artistic traditions of their own was nothing but obvious, given the ascetic way of life embraced by the founders of their doctrine. The Tirthankaras are all said to have renounced the pleasures of a princely life, and the Shvetambara canonical text contain many warnings against the seductions of art forms. We can mention here the passage from the Raya Paseniya Sutta analyzed by Sasha Restifo in a paper she published in 2019. So I give you a summary of the passage. So a god named Suribaya is rejoiced by a sermon given by Mahavira, and he requested permission to express his profound devotion by having dance dramas performed in front of the monastic community. And however, Mahavira ignores these words of the god and remains silent. And in a later commentary of this text, Malayagiri explains that the Jaina's silence ensues from the fact that the Jaina himself had conquered all desires and patience, and therefore had no interest in watching a dance drama, while monks were not supposed to see it, as it would ruin their religious practice. Similarly, many pastimes are prohibited in the Ayaranga Sutta. So I quote again, "A monk should not resolve to go to places where storytellers or acrobats perform, or where continuously storytelling, dramatic plays, singing, music, performances on the veena, beating of time, playing on the turiya, clever playing on the pataha is going on." It is also noteworthy that the embodiment of the 64 arts in the South Asian culture, I mean the courtesan, is also the archetype of the temptation in Jainism. And for instance, we can remember the story of the monk Stulabhadra, where he decides to stay at the place of a courtesan named Kosha to put to a test his commitment to his monastic vows. And of course, not only he triumphs, but he also converts the courtesan. So all these examples to underline the fact that in early Jainism, there were some, the monks were quite uneasy with all these artistic forms of art, and nevertheless, slowly sometimes later than the Buddhists, the Jains appropriated a large panels of art, not only sculpture, architectures, painting, but also performing arts like theater, painted cloth made for performance, and so on. And so they all give interesting contributions to the development of these arts, even though in some cases, these traditions, Jain contribution to these artistic traditions were only lasting for a few centuries. And it must be noted that there still remains a kind of tension within Jainism about the appropriation of these forms of art, as exemplified by the justifications. Many Jain poets or playwrights felt compelled to insert at the outset of their works, and also we can notice that even the cult of icons, which can appear at first as typically Jain, has been challenged through the centuries by aniconic and even iconoclast movements, as shown by John Cort in his book Framing the Jaina. So the tradition of Jain art are rich, complex, and I think we are very lucky today that our two colleagues will bring some more light on them. Thank you. So firstly, we will adopt the theoretical approach of the question of arts with Sasha's paper. And so I give you the floor, and I can't wait to hear you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for such a wonderful introduction, Basile. I'm very happy to see you here, and I look forward to anything and everything you have to say about what I'm going to say. I also wanted to thank Chris and Tina and Marie-Hélène for inviting me and for really just putting together this wonderful series that brings so many people together, and such a wonderful lineup you have for the rest of the series. I have just shared my screen. I hope it works. You can see my screen, right? And you can hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
everything's perfect, yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So not to waste time, I'm going to begin. The image of the world as a stage or theater has existed across cultures since early times and continues to be an effective communicative device, as demonstrated by the recent argument of J. Garfield in Losing Ourselves, Learning to Live Without a Self. Inspired by Buddhist and European philosophy that addresses the illusion of the self, J. Garfield suggests that it is not only more truthful, but also more beneficial to think of ourselves as persons, that is, as, and I quote, beings who come into existence in open causal interaction with the rest of the world, and whose identity is constituted by the collectively composed narrative in which we are dramatic persona, end quote. Garfield asserts that the notion of the self is highly problematic because it creates an illusion of one's independence and freedom from the rest of the world and assigns a special status to oneself. Instead, he suggests that thinking of oneself as a character in a play with no protagonists is to recognize one's identity is constituted by the collectively composed narrative, end quote. That is, to see oneself as socially and narratively constituted being. In Jaina philosophy and literature, dramatic metaphors and discussions about theater are abundant, just as Basile has pointed out right now. Yet, as he also pointed out, there is no consensus among Jain mendicants regarding the intentionality or reception of aesthetics or drama. Performance has been part of Jain ritual and devotional texts, and devotional culture since early times, and notions about guising and acting appear in the earliest extant canonical texts, and like Isibhasiyaim, analyzed by Nalini Balbir, for instance, and acquire heightened significance in the early second millennium. This period marks the entrance of aesthetic terminology into Jain philosophical treatises, the construction of large theatre halls, rangamandapas, in Jain temples, and a divergence in mendicant attitudes towards drama, with some composing plays and texts on aesthetics, and others strictly prohibiting performance in temple worship. This paper focuses on Kunda Kunda's Samayasara along with its commentaries, the Atmakhyati self-awareness with its verses called Kalashas, auspicious pots, by the scholiast Amritachandra, 11th century. It will highlight Amritachandra's creative use of aesthetic terminology of classical Indian theories of aesthetics to explain the often abstruse assertions of Kunda Kunda on Jainism's central conundrum, the relationship of the non-material soul to material karma. In her Philosophy as Drama, Amritachandra and Abhinavagupta, Phyllis Grenoff is the first to observe that the language of Amritachandra's commentaries on Kunda Kunda's works, including the Samayasara and the Pravachanasara, is, and I quote, steeped in the language of the drama and aesthetic theory, end quote. Given the radical difference between the soul, states of emotion, and the physical world, how the soul can function as an agent of its own transformation and liberation is a question that preoccupies Kunda Kunda and Amritachandra. This paper shows how Amritachandra calls upon contemporaneous theories of experience of drama for his answer. I argue that Amritachandra's use of aesthetic vocabulary provides a familiar framework for him to explain the meaning of Kunda Kunda's notion of the self, the state of complete self-absorption, free from agency, that transcends duality and even perspectivism, Savanaya Pakharahido in Samayasara. Both Kunda Kunda and Amritachandra assert that one becomes an agent and experiencer of a cognitive or embodied state through temporary identification with that state. Temporary identification and agency are inseparable, allowing the soul's radical authorship of life choices. Through identification, karma as an action and soul as the agent maintain a relationship of product and producer, bhava bhavaka, underscoring how agency supersedes predisposition. Kunda Kunda provides an example using sexual desire. Although sexual desire towards men and women is part of karma, this doesn't imply a situation in which one karma desires another karma. While karma is responsible for sexual desire, an individual is ultimately in control of their urges. The soul ceases to be the agent of its cognitive and embodied states only when it ceases to identify with them, becoming solely the knower. In the state of the knower, the soul surpasses analytical and conceptual framework. Amritachandra defines the term Samayasara, the essence of the self, the title of Kunda Kunda's work on which he is commenting, as follows: the highest self, which is knowledge itself, the inner light that directly experiences only itself in the form of self-awareness. This definition presents the soul as indivisible and distinct from all other substances, existing in the state of complete self-absorption. To explain this vision of the soul, Amritachandra uses aesthetic categories. He describes the soul as both an actor and an active spectator in the drama of life. Kunda Kunda's introduction of the two viewpoints, well known by everyone, the real or absolute Nishchaya and the conventional practical Vyavahara, has often been overlooked by scholars of Jain philosophy, and I'm not going to go into the depth of that right now. Amritachandra's incorporation of aesthetic vocabulary and concepts into his commentaries on Kunda Kunda's philosophical text serves to elucidate the two-truth theory. Kunda Kunda suggests that from the real or absolute perspective, a person is free from karmic states, while from conventional or practical perspective, a person appears to be bound by them. This is akin to an actor or a spectator in a play. Though they may seem overtaken by a character's emotions, they are in fact free from these states, which belong solely to the character. In other words, the distinction between the real and the conventional viewpoints of the two-truth theory can be understood as analogous to the distinction between an actor's true self and the role they play, or a spectator's true self and their temporary identification with the character's emotions. Amrita Chandra explains that the drama, staged by karmic bondage, bandha, creates the great drama, Mahanatyena, of delusion, moha, in living beings. Just as an actor or spectator is not the character they act out or identify with, the soul from the Nishchaya perspective, often referred to by Kunda Kunda and Amrita Chandra as Shuddhanaya, pure perspective, remains completely free from external states. However, when actors and spectators identify with the character states, they temporarily become agents and experiencers of those states, just as a person becomes an agent of karmic states when they identify with them due to ignorance and karmic bondage. So this identification with alien modes corresponds to the conventional perspective. Amrita Chandra refers to this perspective as the perspective of mode, highlighting the capacity of a substance to undergo change. Paryayarthika. From the modal viewpoint, Paryayarthikanaya, the soul is in a state of constant transformation, passing through various modes, Paryayas. From the perspective of substance, Dravyarthikanaya, the soul is unchanging and unaffected by external conditions or transformations, and it attains the state of constancy, Sthitikarana. Knowledge, jnana, is presented as both the noble character and the only true stable emotion of the soul. The element of consciousness is completely pure and reaches the state of stability, being filled with its own rasa. In Sanskrit aesthetics, sthāyi bhava refers to a permanent or dominant emotional state that underlies all other emotions and remains stable. For the soul, knowledge is the only enduring emotional state, the stable foundation of its being. This state of knowledge is to be relished as the rasa of reality, Amrita Chandra explains. The concept of rasa refers to the essence or flavor of an emotional experience that an audience feels when they engage with a work of art, such as drama or poetry. In this context, the rasa of reality refers to the ultimate experiential understanding of the true nature of existence that the soul achieves through knowledge. In contrast, passions like anger, pride, or greed are considered transient emotions, vyabhichari bhavas, emotional states that come and go, disrupting the soul's stability. The soul mistakenly identifies with these transient emotions due to delusion, moha, which clouds its awareness of its true state of knowledge. Amrita Chandra explains Kunda Kunda's philosophy by drawing on the teleological nature of drama, whose ultimate goal is to evoke an aesthetic experience of rasa in the audience. For Amrita Chandra, the goal of the drama of life is for the soul to experience the only true aesthetic emotion of knowledge, which is its true self. However, the soul must first engage in the drama of life, undergoing a process of identification with various states and emotions, akin to the way in which actors and spectators identify with the states and emotions of characters in a play. Amrita Chandra's commentary begins with a prologue, Purvaranga, and the appearance of a stage director, Sutra Avatara. Each of the subsequent chapters is introduced by the entrance of personified reals, tattvas. For instance, we encounter stage directions such as soul and matter having become one, enter, and soul and matter having become separate, exit. These directions appear at the beginning of each chapter to announce a new topic, framing the commentary as a kind of drama. Amrita Chandra explains the soul's transformation into other states, as I explained, as a process of identification in the following way. For instance, the soul becomes the experiencer of a state belonging to another when it brings about when it brings it about through the process of identification, tanmayatvena, and this state becomes the experience of the soul when it is brought about through the process of identification, tanmayatvena. Amrita Chandra describes the soul and matter as actors taking on roles such as agent and karma. That very soul and matter enter in the roles of agent and karma. The soul thus identifies with karmic states and takes on the role of being their agent. Addressing the spectators of the drama as connoisseurs, Rasikanam, Amrita Chandra urges them to wake up and observe the distinction between soul and matter. The idea that an actor or spectator identifies with a character and their states can be traced back to early aesthetic theory, beginning with Bharata's Natya Shastra, the oldest extant text on dramaturgy. Aesthetic emotions, such as the rasas and the enduring emotional states, sthayi bhavas, that reveal rasas, were initially understood as belonging solely to the actor or artist, not the spectator. Later, particularly with the works of the famed Kashmiri theorists Bhattanayaka and Abhinavagupta, there was a shift towards focusing on the aesthetic experience of the audience. These theorists engage in the discussions on how the audience experiences aesthetic pleasure and on the nature of this pleasure itself. Most famously, Bhattanayaka describes the spectator's aesthetic experience as a process of universalization, or what Sheldon Pollock calls communalization, sadharanikarana. In this process, the spectator universalizes the character's emotions, meaning that the emotions are depersonalized, stripped of their specific circumstances, and disconnected from a particular time or individual. Through the process of sadharanikarana, or generalization, spectators identify the same term, tanmaya bhavana, with the character's stable emotions, as proposed by Abhinavagupta. The key difference between Amrita Chandra and Abhinavagupta lies in their interpretation of this identification. For Abhinavagupta, attaining this identification leads to and I quote, to the realization of one's highest self, end quote, through a deeper engagement with aesthetic experience. In contrast, for Amrita Chandra, the experience of any rasa other than one's own, svarasa, through the process of identification results in the loss of one's true self. Amrita Chandra explains that the passions and other states which the soul wrongly identifies are transient, vyabhichari, and only, as I said, the stable emotion of knowledge brings about peace, shanti, and wondrous delight, chamatkara. Amrita Chandra's conception of savoring, svadamanam, of true knowledge, jnanam ekam, elevates the soul to the state of non-duality by presenting knowledge as the experience of the highest truth and eliminating distinctions between the emotion of knowledge, the self as spectator or actor, and the character knowledge in his drama of life. Amrita Chandra illustrates the dissolution of limited cognition that is bound to the duality of samsara. As Grenov observes, Amrita Chandra refers to this enlightened state as a mass of knowledge, jnana ghana, one in which all notions of object and subject, self, other, are absent. There's another way, in another kalasha, he calls it avabodha ghanaha. These Grenov notes, and I quote, recalls Abhinavagupta's description of the state of sadharani bhavana, end quote. It is a state free of particulars, a cognition described by Abhinavagupta as ekaghanata, a single dense mass of knowledge. Amrita Chandra's use of aesthetic theory not only explains the nature of the soul and the process of returning to itself in a way first delineated by Kunda Kunda, but also shows the path to ultimate knowledge is one of aesthetic realization. Knowledge is the main character in Amrita Chandra's drama, described in terms that recall a dramatic hero as steadfast, upright, favorable. Knowledge defeats bondage and effortlessly acts out its own natural state. Knowledge plays an active role in the drama as it awakens the spectators, the text says, through its powerful insight into the discrimination between the soul and non-soul, and soothes their minds. But it is when he comes to describe the ultimate goal of Jain search, the rasa of reality, that is the culmination of the Jain religious experience that Amrita Chandra transforms of aesthetic theory into Jain philosophy is complete. Amrita Chandra portrays knowledge as an aesthetic emotion that embodies ultimate truth. He repeatedly calls on connoisseurs to savor the knowledge, as the soul is nothing but a single indivisible light of knowledge. For Abhinavagupta, the direct experience of rasa in the form of aesthetic savoring is distinct from all other forms of cognition, including correct knowledge, samyak jnana, but many others. Similarly, for Amrita Chandra, knowledge is not limited to one of various types of knowledge found in Jain metaphysics. Rather, it transcends division and represents the pure experience of one's true soul, true self, or anubhuti. In this context, the agency of the soul collapses as the agent and the object merge into a state of unity and oneness. The soul cannot be considered an agent of knowledge because the soul itself is knowledge. Thus, there are no causal relations between the two. This is how he explains this. The glory of perspectives does not rise. Proof is setting down. We don't know what the discus of analytic technique, where the discus of analytic techniques goes. What more can we say? When the soul becomes the all-encompassing radiance, it experiences itself, and duality, dvaitam, does not appear. Duality vanishes in the experience described by both Amrita Chandra and Abhinavagupta. Amrita Chandra describes the soul's highest state as one in which it merges within itself. The enlightened being is likened to the ocean of knowledge, and all people together are urged to plunge themselves into its rasa of peace, shanta rasa. Bhattanayaka describes aesthetic experience with the term Vishranti, or absorptive experience, which signifies, as Sheldon Pollock states, a full repose in the true nature of one's consciousness, end quote. It is this state that Amrita Chandra appears to describe in his verses. As he states, when the soul attains the great bliss of the singular state of the knower, it can no longer establish the experience of duality and knows only the state of its own self. Under the influence of the experience of self-awareness, it escapes the rise of otherness, and through generalization, samanyam kalayan, brings all this knowledge into oneness. The soul acquires generalized samanyam knowledge, just as in aesthetics, under the influence of its own direct experience. Amrita Chandra uses here also the term anubhava, which denotes experience, but can also denote a physical reaction in aesthetics, perhaps suggesting that the direct experience of the soul, atma anubhava, manifests as a physical reaction, anubhava, that evokes the stable emotion of knowledge, which is experienced as the rasa of reality. Amrita Chandra portrays the experience of enlightenment as one of complete steadiness and repose. He clarifies that the states that are momentary and multiple are transient, while the state that is unchanging, indivisible, and eternal is not transient. By employing the theory of aesthetic experience, Amrita Chandra indicates that the soul is capable of transcending all fleeting states with the state of aesthetic pleasure characterized by permanence and unity. Amrita Chandra's exploration of aesthetic experience reveals profound insights into the nature of knowledge and the soul. He underscores the importance of focusing inward to attain the natural state of true bliss, sahaja parama ananda. This alignment of knowledge, emotion, and experience, made possible through the use of concepts and notions taken from the field of aesthetics, offers a new paradigm to understand Jain metaphysics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was.
And I just want to say right away that I very much look forward to any comments going forward. And particularly, I want to say that Maria Len, Ivana Basile is here. Anything you can say. And, I'm curious on that part too. So there are two aspects to that. Basile Leclère is, obviously, is an expert on drama, but I know I engage with philosophy, which I'm deeply interested in. And so on that part, I look forward to any comments as well, of course.
Thank you very much for this very interesting dialogue between aesthetic theory and Jain philosophy. So I think that we should turn immediately to Anna, and we'll save our questions for later. So Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Basile. I share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Oh.
Ah. Okay. No, everybody except me.
Everybody can, Marie-Hélène, can you see it?
Yes, yes, I can see
It's
it well.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. So I would like, first of all, to thank Marie-Hélène and Christopher and Tina for inviting me to be part of this online seminar series and for giving me the opportunity to share with you some of my ongoing research on the representation of performances in sculptures. And today specifically focusing on a sculpture from Mathura, a Jain sculpture from Mathura. Now, my goal for this presentation today is not to give final answers, which I don't have, but rather to raise an awareness about the study of the representations of performing arts in visual arts as an important tool to increase our understanding of Jain art and culture in general. So I will have more questions than answers today, to be honest, and I look forward for your feedback about what you will hear and see today. My analysis is mostly based on the content of the Natya Shastra. As most of you know, the most ancient and authoritative treatise that has reached us about the ancient Indian performing arts. The date of which is uncertain, but generally accepted to be somewhere between the 2nd century BCE and the 2nd century CE. And the content of which I will consider today in my analysis of the sculpture as being a systematized version of diverse material belonging to also pre-existing artistic traditions. The Natya Shastra is also interesting because in spite of its obscure origins, the authority of the text is such that its content has been preserved very faithfully in later works on performing arts. And those offer a great deal of information about the state of the ancient performing arts of India. Now, the sculptures which I'm going to talk about today is, you can see it here. This is a sculpture from Mathura, from the site of Kankali Tila, and it is in a poor state of preservation. As you can see, mortise cuts are visible and they are right there on the engraved surface. If we look at the image from left to right, you can see two larger size figures sitting on two platforms with their hands in Dhyana Mudra. And these two figures are nude, no ornaments either, and they've been identified as being two images of the first Jaina Rishabhanata, identified by the mark of a single lock of hair, which is projecting from the top of the head. I don't know if you can see it, but it is in the shape of a pigtail rather than the usual mane of flowing hair over shoulders that we are used to. Next to the Jaina are attendants and other ascetics. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go into the details of these figures, but I would like to take your attention to the right side of the panel, where we see first a number of men. Some of them are standing, some of them are sitting, and they're looking at a dancer who is performing under a roofed pavilion supported by 4 pillars, and she's surrounded by 5 musicians. We can see that 4 of them are playing a drum instrument of some sort, while the 5th instrument is not visible. Now, based on stylistic features, Sonia Rhee, in her book in 2007, dates this sculpture to the 1st century BCE, a date which has generally been accepted. About the identification of this sculpture, it's interesting to see that since the late 40s, Jyoti Prasad Jain first and then U.P. Shah later in 1955 identified this sculpture as a representation of the story of the Apsaras Nilanjana, who, as many of you know, was sent by Indra, according to who was sent by Indra to prompt in the future Jaina Rishabha the desire for renunciation and So therefore she was picked because her life was coming to an end soon. So she was sent there to perform, and while performing, she fell dead suddenly as if struck by a lightning. And this dramatic event prompted in the future Jaina Rishabha, who, according to the scholars who identified this image with the story of Rishabha, you can see him seated probably here and holding with his hand one of the pillar of the pavilion and wearing a turban here, if you can see my cursor, I don't know. Anyway, nonetheless, this identification has been challenged by Robert Del Bonta first and John Court later, mostly based on the fact that the first sources mentioning the story of Nilanjana are from the 9th century Karnataka, Jinasena Adi Purana. Therefore, we have a gap of around 1,000 years from this sculpture to the first mention known to today of the story of Nilanjana. Sonia Rhee is in favor of this identification, and in her book, she describes the dance of this figure, which you see here, using certain words, which I'm quoting: wild, energetic, exaggerated, frantically intense, frenzied, and vigorous. And this was really interesting to me because the point I would like to make today is, can an in-depth analysis of the movement of these sculptures help us in better understanding what is this person doing and which kind of performance this was? Is this really a frantic and wild and energetic dance? How can we say that? So, in fact, if we read Jinasena's Adi Purana, it is described very much as such a type of dance. And for example, one of the main feature of this dance, which are confirmed by Pampa in his Adi Purana later, is that the dance is very full of flavor. You know, the words uses rasa bhava layopetam. It is described as a very sensual dance, which takes away the mind of the spectators and so on. So I would like to argue here that the technical language of dance is used by sculptures with purpose. It's not just random posture to fit an architectural space, but it's used with purpose to communicate some meanings, which can be related to the narrative layer, but also they can be conveying more subtle information. And I will try to work on this sculpture today based on this assumption. First of all, I would like to draw your attention on the posture of this female figure here. If we try to describe it, I would say that you should look first at the arms posture. The right arm, as you can see, her right arm is stretched down toward the side, at the side of the body, in what is known in the Shastras as Rechita or Lata or Karihasta posture, while the left arm is raised with the elbow pointing sideways, the wrist bent at 90 degrees, and her hand is kept very close to her ear, with the head and neck tilted deeply to the right side, and her gaze, we can imagine gazing down at her hand or somewhere in the hip region. If we look at the torso of the dancer here, you can see that the torso is raised. The breasts are shown in different dimensions. So we can imagine that the left breast is smaller in size, and possibly to suggest a sort of a rotation of the body. And the lower body, you can see the left leg is bent in a half knee bend, something similar to Ardamandali, Aramandi, if you're familiar with Bharatanatyam, but not sideways in this case, just more frontal. And this could be just due to the space available to the sculpture, as the drum is right there, as you can see. Most interesting is the right leg. Now, the right leg is stretched to the side, and the right foot, I would love you to look at that carefully. I'm coming back to that later, but the right foot, as you can see, has the heel touching the ground, and the forepart of the foot is lifted with this wonderful detail of the raised toes or raised toe. We don't know that. If they're all raised, I think that maybe all raised. So is this frozen movement linked to some known patterns of ancient dance? Based on my previous works on this topic, I I'm confident in saying that if the sculpture chose this posture to be depicted with such detail, attention for the details, and especially if you compare this image, and I will show you other images later, with other representation of dance in this period, in this region, nowhere you can find such precision in describing the details of the body posture, in carving even the raised toes and this very lovely stretching of the legs. So the amount of details the sculpture is offering us here suggests to me that this was intended to communicate something to the viewer, to let the viewers know what she was doing. He also wanted to tell the viewers that she was an experienced dancer, a great dancer, experienced, who could perform very elaborate movements. But also the question we should ask is why, amongst all the movements, the sculptor decided to pick this one in particular. Now, before moving on into a more technical description of the movement, which will conclude my presentation, I would like to briefly introduce, for all of you who are not familiar with the technical terms of the Natya Shastra, three concepts. The first one is the concept of Abhinaya. Abhinaya in the Natya Shastra is traditionally explained with a traditional etymology of the root ni, to carry, and abhi as a prefix, abhimukha, to carry in front of the spectators, padartha, the meaning of the theater of the performance. And so angika abhinaya is a full set of body language where correspondences are drawn between specific body postures and movement and meanings to be conveyed to the spectators on the stage, to spectators. And this Angika Abhinaya creates a technical language of the body movement, which is shared to great extent by sculptures as well. The other two concepts which I need to introduce very, very briefly are those of Karanas and Angahara. Now, Karana is a basic unit of movement in the Natya Shastra. That is, if you move together all the limbs of the body in a certain way, which is prescribed in the Shastra, you will perform what is called a Karana. And Karanas had great importance in the Natya Shastra and in later Shastras too, to the point that they are defined as prana, or the vital essence of nritta, of dance. So despite of this great importance, the Karana tradition is interrupted. So at some point they were not performed anymore. We think about the 15th century. Afterwards, we don't have trace of performances of Angaharas, of Karanas anymore. But they held great importance, and they were widely spread and widely known in the whole subcontinent. And even we have a temple in Java which shows a representation of these Karanas. Now, the last technical term for today is Angahara. So when you performed a number of Karanas together, there you will perform an Angahara. And these three terms will come back towards the end of my talk. Now, the movement which we saw for the dancer of our, which is the topic of my talk today, is a common pattern of movement, I would say. If we look at other images from Mathura, non-dancing figures, female non-dancing figures, such as Yakshis, Apsaras, Shalabanjikas, they all show very similar pattern of movements, especially regarding the arms. And at this stage, arms were the focus of the sculpture's attention. And even because of this, I would like to say how special, I would like to remark how special our sculpture is, because the details of the legs posture are quite unusual at this time. So you can see here just a quick selection of female semi-divine beings that show in which the sculpture has used the same kind of arm movement. You can see the same type of movement, and here too. look at this one here. So it is clear to me that this type of movement, especially, again, let's focus on the arms for now, was considered somehow to be beautiful, auspicious, to represent perfectly the nature of these characters, and also to fit the architectural space, to fit the location in which these sculptures were carved. Just to show you, I put a small image of our dancer to compare, to make it easier for you. And again, just another example here. So what happens when we move from non-dancing figures to dancing figures? That is, dancer female figures who show this posture, but in the context of a proper dance. And I define a proper dance by the presence of musicians. And here you have an example from the same site, Kankalitila in Mathura. And you can see that here too, the top portion of the body is exactly identical to our dancer. And you can compare the two here. Now, it is possible to compare our dancer with other dancers in Mathura, as we have seen, and other female figures in Mathura. But another very interesting comparison can be drawn with two well-known dance scenes from Bharhut. And the first one, which I'm talking about, is here in the Indian Museum, Kolkata. And this dance scene shows 4 dancers surrounded by musicians and spectators. And they are celebrating the festival of the hairlock of the Buddha, which you can see. So the inscription is on the top part of the sculpture. And you can see also the gods looking down at the dance performance. The second sculpture about which I'm talking and comparing it with our Jain sculpture from Mathura is this one. Again, very well-known dance scene from a Vedika pillar. And here you got 4 female dancers, a young boy dancer to the right of the sculpture, and to the other side you have 8 female musicians playing different types of musical instruments. Now, if we compare these two between them, and we keep in mind our dancer from Mathura, we can see that, so let's start with comparing these two images first. You can see that they correspond, the numbers in yellow correspond to the numbers in green in terms of their posture. The two number one yellow and number 1 green are not exactly the same in the arms posture, but as I can explain that to, I mean, not here for the sake of time, but these are just 2 variations of the same movement, and it's pretty clear. Otherwise, the number 2 yellow corresponds to number 2 green, number 3 yellow corresponds to number 3 green, and number 4 yellow corresponding to number 4 green. Now, this is very interesting, but I don't think we have time to go into the depths of it now. I just want you to notice that our dancer from Mathura is exactly performing the movement number 3. And if the Prasenajit pillar doesn't show us the leg movement of these sculptures, well, the other Ajatashatru pillar shows us very well that this is a particular chari or movement of the legs, which is exactly the same as our sculpture from Mathura is performing, just she is performing it better, I would say. Here, I forgot to mention first, but it's important to mention this. Our sculpture from Mathura, unfortunately, doesn't have any inscription coming with it. So in the absence of epigraphical sources, we will never know who she is and what she's performing, right? But interestingly enough, the Prasenajit pillar carry an inscription attached to these dance scenes. Not only the names of the 4 dancers are mentioned as being 4 apsaras, but in the blue square, what you see there in the blue square is an inscription very well known as well, which in Prakrit, which says Sadika Sammadam Turam Devanam. Now, the Luders has translated it as the music of the gods accompanied by a mimic dance. So he takes sadika as a technical term and sammadam as an adjective rather than the most, I would say, common first translation of sammadam as a noun, as exhilaration or joy. And in doing so, he creates quite a successful precedent, which has been followed by a number of scholars after him. Sadika being a technical term, we may wonder if our sculptor from Mathura, our dancer from Mathura, sorry, is also performing some movement of this sadika, being a sort of ancient dance, if we accept this reading. But of course, what is sadika, we don't know. And according to Luders and others, this is a sort of antecedent of what is known later as sataka. And this is super interesting. And we have Basile here, who could be the best person to talk about this. But anyway, this is also an open possibility for now. Let's leave it to that. Of course, this interpretation is challenged and mostly on the basis of etymological reasons. And sataka means etymology being possibly that of an uparupaka sa-ata, with ata being the Dravidian name for dance. On the other hand, between this sculpture and the first mention of the sataka as an uparupaka, again, 1,000 years of gap. And so, I don't know, so we'll leave it to that. But anyway, no. Yeah, so I just would like to show you now, I'm reaching my conclusions, but I would just like to point out for you 4 clear features. I know this can be a bit confusing if you're not into the technical language of the Shastras, but I just want to sum up before concluding by saying that the 4 clear features that we see in the sculptures are, again, a link to the arms and hands postures, and I'm just summing them up here. And I just wanted to mention that this arm posture, which we see in our dancer from Mathura, is very well known in the world of dance sculptures from different periods and different regions of India. And the hand posed as a pataka or flag hasta or a visma alapallava hasta, where the fingers are opening and rotating towards the palm of the hand, is a common hasta which we find in sculptures. In fact, it is known in the Shilpa Shastras as Vismaya hasta, and it is used to convey the sense of Adbhuta. Now, another road which opens up here, and we don't have the time today to explore that, but I'm asking myself, the sculptures from Mathura often show this hasta as a response to a theatrical performance. Okay, here is just the regular Abhaya mudra for a goddess, but you can see that the Mathura sculptures often show the Pataka hasta in response to a performance. And here you have some examples, or a celebration of festivity of some sort. And I'm wondering what can be the meaning of that, possibly a sort of auspicious reception or appreciation for the performance or something like that, but this is an open debate. If we move to the torso and the hinted rotation that I see in that sort of turning and different size of the breasts, I would say that that goes together with the tilted head and neck, which in the Shastra is called parivahita, and it's usually associated with the expression of Adbhuta or Vismaya. About the legs and feet. Now, this is the most important piece of information, together with arms and hands, of course. I see that hips suggest, again, a possible rotation of the body. And then we have the detail of that wonderful foot, which the technical term for which is anchita, that is the heel down and the forward part up. And the raised toes too are very intriguing for other reasons. But the Anchita foot is mentioned in a limited number of chari and karanas, which help us sort of reducing the possible units of movements that these dancers could be performing. Now, Holt, in her PhD dissertation 1999 about dance in Buddhist sculptures, she thinks that the sculptures you saw, the two images from Barhut, they represent a Angahara, that is a sequence of karanas. And our dancer from Mathura, being performing the figure number 3, if you remember, she is performing a karana according to Holt, which is called Karihasta. Now, this sequence from Barhut, she thinks that could be representing an Angahara called Arthanikuttaka Angahara. And I've been investigating a bit, and I think it's kind of reasonable. And I would say I kind of agree with her. So I just wanted to show to you different possibilities for the interpretation of these sculptures, although I don't limit myself to that option, and I would like to offer a couple of more options. So the first is called Karana Nikutana. This is fully technical, but I just want to go with you through some of the possibilities and just highlight the features which we mentioned. So an up and down movement called Nikutana in the Shastras is usually represented in the way that you saw in our dancers from Mathura. And so the Nikutana accompanied by the Alapalava or this Vismaya mudra of the hand is something that we're putting away and keeping for the conclusions. Another possibility is that of a Karihastakarana. Now, this is a very interesting possibility, according to me, because we have the Anchita foot, the foot which you saw in the sculpture is featured here. Although the Vini Yoga or theatrical usage mentioned for this karana is nothing special apart from the mimetic nature of representing the elephant trunk, which gives the karana its name. This is an important karana because it features in almost all the Angahara sequences. And I think that the reason for this is because it involves a lot of rotation and transitional movements, which are usually called recita, and sculptures used to convey the sense of movement, of course, trying to overcome the limitation of the stone. Another karana which could be seen there is a Katichinna, the split waist, where we have the combination of a moving, rotating waist with the hand in Alapalava to express wonder, according to its Vini Yoga. Chatura Karana is also a possibility because it combines Kutita movement, up and down, rotation, Alapalava, and it is used again to express wonder or Vismaya. The last one, which I'm presenting here as a possibility, is called Karana Lalita, and Lalita has again the arming Karihasta or Rechita, the Rechita movements of the fingers, the Kutita, which we saw, up and down movements, and it is used to represent a gentle dance, a dance full of grace on stage. And so just some key elements summed up again, and then I would like to present my conclusions, is that we saw the presence of Alapalava hands or Pataka hands, the flourishing Rechita movements of the fingers, the arms stretched down in Rechita or Karihasta or Lalita, and a possible rotation of the body hinted at by the sculpture, upwards and downwards alternate movement, as you could see from that foot, the Anchita foot with raised toes, and the realm of the theatrical usages of Vini Yoga for the selected sequences are kind of recurring. So the three which are kind of recurring into these 6 options are Vismaya, Lalita, and then one word which I would like to hear your feedback about, what you think about how to translate this, is Atma Sambhavana. And I hope someone will comment on this in the Q&A. Now, so my conclusions. This movement seems to me to be part of a shared repertoire of celebrative dances, possibly shared by different religious affiliations, as we have seen. This dance was recognized, I think, to be festive in nature and fit for the context of a holy place, of a holy occasion, a fact that per se does not rule out the possibility that this dance was also performed, could have also been performed in a court environment. It was performed by women. Adbhuta or Vismaya seems to be prevalent in it. It was more nritta or pure dance compared to a more elaborate plot or dialogues. And we know, for example, of Hindu festivals or Hindu temples where theaters were built in the temple courtyards, performances were held, artists, performing artists, actors and actresses, acrobats and yogis would hang out and perform at this occasion. And Basile before just quoted a passage which implies the existence of these gatherings. Then on another side, I hope my work can shed some, I would like to shed some light on the nature of, and on the identity and agency of these performing artists. Who were they? And what was their role in temple culture? We have evidence of actors in the famous Jamalpur inscription from Mathura. The Chandaka brothers are mentioned as worshippers of the Nagas and religious patrons at in the site. And were they itinerary artists? Were they performing in all sacred festivals, irrespective of their religious affiliation, something similar to what we see in the for the shilpins, for the sculptures? The sculptures, on the other hand, must have seen these dances somewhere before carving them on the stone. And given that these sculptures are very close to what we consider to be a possible date for at least some portions of the Natya Shastra, including some portions dealing with Angika Vinaya, I'm wondering if, this is closer to what it is there in the Natya Shastra compared to other sculptures from other periods and other regions. And also something I'm wondering is, did other schools of dance and theater existed at this point? Do we have something which was specific to Jainism, or how much these Karanas were included in Jain performances, and how much they differ from the only visual sources that we have about Karanas, which are the 5 temples in Tamil Nadu and 1 temple in Java. So I hope my work will help spreading some light on some of these themes, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So I think I am supposed to manage with the Q&A and also my own remarks. So thank you both for your presentations. We are very rich, interesting, a lot of, I think, new considerations about the way Jains dealt with all these performance traditions. So maybe I will go back to Sasha for a start, if you don't mind, Anna.
Oh, no.
Well, I was very, very interested by all these analyses about the way Amrita Chandra made use of this technical vocabulary of aesthetics to develop his philosophical commentary. And I was wondering, what do we know? Maybe it's known by a lot of people in the audience, but what do we know about the context here in which Amrita Chandra wrote his commentaries? I mean, yeah, the localization and because I am a little bit surprised that he is a Digambara, right? And so the only, well, group of dramas authored by a Digambara author are as far as I know, the plays by Hastimala and the datation. I think I should go back to the recent research. Gregory Kleins wrote an article about one of these dramas, but I'm very surprised and interested in the fact that, well, this theory of aesthetic experience meant so much for a Digambara author. You see what I mean? And so I wanted to ask you for your own feeling about the fact that it is so present in his commentary, and even the fact that it begins just like a play. It's very very unusual.
Yes.
Could you say?
I could. Yes, thank you. I could, Basile. Thank you so much for the question. And I've also read your commentary in the questions and answers section. And if you don't mind, I'll bring those together because you interestingly mentioned Bansidhar Bhatt, who has already also, I mentioned in my paper Phyllis Grenov, but Bansidhar Bhatt was someone who observed as well, much earlier, 3 decades ago, if not 4, the fact that that Samayasara itself, that Samayasara and Amrita Chandra's commentary, are very much not aligned, according to him, necessarily with standard Jainism, right? Bansidhar Bhatt is saying, and the reason for that, he says, is because on one hand, is that because it's not the homogeneous work of a single author, number one. Number two is that, therefore, it was a compilation of texts with the more mystical kind of text being the first layer, and with the less mystical, like non-mystic, as he says, layer of text being interpolated later. Now, no one, from what I know, has supported this idea, and we understand why he's coming to that. Well, so according to him, there's not this mystic level, and by answering actually your question, I also want to touch on the other question that was asked earlier about, this dramatic imagery. It's not just in in Amrita Chandra's commentaries, it's kind of everywhere, right? It's all over. For instance, if you just take Samkhya philosophy, Bansidhar Bhatt spoke about that as well. If we take the imagery, the Prakriti is the Nartaki, right, is the dancer, and the Purusha, the soul, is simply a Prekshaka, an observer, right? So it is a dualist also. Samkhya philosophy is a dualist philosophical tradition within Hinduism that also uses, dramatic imagery. So I don't think the fact that Amrita Chandra was, away from kind of the all the noise, when it comes to aesthetics and drama, beginning, with I'm mentioning specifically Kashmiri theorists, because he was a Digambara, and it appears that he probably was in Karnataka. I can't say much more on that, but I could say that he wasn't really inventing the wheel. He was using looks like some of the vocabulary that it appears to be quite popular at that time already, on one hand, but on the other hand, as Bansidhar Bhatt is saying, the mystic level, for instance, of Kunda Kunda's even text and Amrita Chandra's commentary as well, is indeed aligned with Samkhya philosophy more than it is aligned with, standard Jainism. And he goes as far as to say that even beyond Samkhya, he says that mystic level indeed suggests that the soul is real, eternal, unchanging, but matter is not even real, right? We know that Samkhya doesn't appear to say that, but he appears to say that. And why I'm saying this, because, for instance, William Johnson in his Harmless Souls, who also wrote about the Pravachanasara and the Samayasara, disagrees with Bansidhar Bhatt on that. He says that's, a step too far a little bit, he says, going from the connection being illusory to one of the categories being illusory, right, such as matter. So I think that, again, Amrita Chandra is not the first and the last to use aesthetic vocabulary and aesthetic terminology. It spans all kinds of philosophical traditions and texts. But what I'm interested in, and it also has to do with Bansidhar Bhatt, because he says we shouldn't think too much about the fact that Amrita Chandra calls his commentary a drama, a nataka, because it doesn't mean anything but it is but denoting a technical term that tells us that it's a mystical text. says it's not about drama. Do not pay attention to drama. And he says all these dramatic stage directions and things are later interpolations in the commentary. None of that really matters. What matters is that it's a mystical text. And I don't quite agree with that. And the reason for that, if you look at Amrita Chandra's commentary beyond the stage directions, we can guess, okay, maybe they were later, possible, but within the text, within Atmakhyati, not even only in Kalashas. So Kalashas, there's a lot of aesthetic vocabulary, but in the Atmakhyati itself, he uses the word Paramartharasataya, right, Svadamanam, Ekam Gnanam, right, Svadyam. So this kind of thing. So he uses the same vocabulary. So I think we should take it seriously. And that was in a way my response to Bansidhar Bhatt. I agree with him in many ways, but I also think we should take drama seriously when it comes to Amrita Chandra.
Mm. Well, there's a lot of remarks in the Q&A section, so I don't know who is supposed to deal with that. It's you, Chris. I think now.
Yeah, you can feel free to engage the audience, or also if you wanted to refer to Anna's paper as well, or allow Anna to respond, you can also do that as well.
Okay.
So the questions appear in the Q&A to be mostly directed towards Sasha. And so Sasha, I think you kind of gave.
I can go ahead and, yeah, would you like me to?
Yeah,
yeah.
And then, if there's anything that Basile wants to say to Anna as well, we have.
There is one question to Anna from Steve, I think, also in the Q&A.
Okay. Well, I can also shift to Anna briefly, and then we'll see. But because thank you for re-examining this well-known sculpture. I know that there is a lot of controversy, and I think it's really interesting to focus on the details, because I think that the craftsmen and the people who commissioned these pieces of art knew exactly what they wanted. So it is worth seeing the details as you do right now. And I think that the parallel with the Buddhist scriptures is particularly interesting, because it raises a lot of questions. For instance, maybe in the Buddhist scriptures there are not really 4 women, but just one in 4 different moments of a performance. That could be also something we could think about.
Well, in the case of the Prasenajit pillar, we have inscriptions mentioning 4 different names.
Okay.
So that is ruled out, I would say, for that one. But so I think more than that, we are in the Barhoud sculptures, we are witnessing what Deheja has called a networked movement. That is the same movement which is shown by 4 different dancers in its 4 different stages, sort of thing. Yeah.
Because I think that the idea that maybe it's not what has been guessed by U.P. Shah and other scholars, it's not it could be as you think demonstrated, merely an expression of astonishment in front of the renouncement scene that is on the left, that is expressed on the right, and not a particular mythological episode. And I think that analyzing the Vismaya Hasta as a meaning, because Natya Shastra is full of explanations about the meaning of all these dance movements, as you said, and I think it's quite convincing that we can have the reaction and the celebration by the divine court of Indra facing the moment Rishabha or some other Jaina renounce the world. So I think it's quite difficult to select one of the karana you listed in your paper, but I think maybe it's not the point. The point being that we have something maybe meaningful as the question of, well, showing an experimented dancer expressing a feeling that, well, could be the feeling shared by all the audience, the vismaya, the admiration for this act of renunciation. I think this is quite convincing, actually.
Yes, if I may, and I think I'm also partially answering to the question by Stephen, which I see in the Q&A. I would like to stress again the fact that due to their very nature, it is impossible for us to reconstruct exactly performing arts from ancient India. So we need to work with what we have, and what we have are textual sources, the Shastras, and also we have some visual sources. In fact, those temples in which there was the programmatic representation of these karanas, sometimes with an inscription from the Natya Shastra mentioning which karana it was carved. But yes, so there is no, in spite of great attempts from scholars and dancers in the past, I don't think it's possible to know for sure, but something that I think we can do pretty safely is look at this vast mass and amount of sculptures and see that there are recurrent patterns of movement. And though we never know which karana it is, by following those patterns of movement, you can sort of size down the possibilities and reach a number of possible karanas or units of movement, which is more manageable, and sometimes they kind of concur to give out an idea or at least a possibility that the dance was intended to represent something like that. And again, you know, I really don't know whether that is Nilanjana or not, but I think that by looking more carefully into the movement, we can move beyond just saying, okay, so she's Nilanjana, so she's doing a frantic, erotic, wild, crazy dance just because I want her to be Nilanjana. So look at the, let the image speak and look at that movement and try to see, of course, always with extreme caution. And I'm really aware that this is a dangerous kind of operation, but with extreme caution, see if those patterns of movement are recurrent again, analyze each detail and see where that can be found. Again, put yourself in the shoes of the sculptures and say, you know, you want to convey this type of dance. How do you do that? How do you overcome the limitation of the stone, and how do you frame in one frozen image that particular dance which you want to represent? Of course, in the case of Barhut, we have 4 dancers, or 5 if you count the little boy, and that's easier in a way that you can create that network movement. For some reason unknown to us, the sculpture in the case of our dancer from Mathura decided to put only 1 apsaras, and so that could be because he wanted to refer to a specific narrative, yes, or it could be because he didn't have space, yes, or it could be sometimes, you know, apsaras are considered sort of a collective noun, so one stands for all of them. So it's really it's difficult to have final, it's impossible to have final answers here, but I hope that, you know, I could at least contribute a bit of more about this very famous sculpture, as you said, which is very beautiful, by the way. Yeah. Thank you, Basile.
Thanks a lot. I think we may, and most unfortunately, have come to an end to the end of this session. So I was wondering whether we should. It's very frustrating to stop here, but Sasha, please expect an email from me soon with more questions. I think Tina, you have something to say. Yes, to.
All right.
Thank you.
No, I just wanted to speak up and thank all of you also from my part for making this possible, you guys in the audience, but especially your speakers and our moderator today. On your screen right now is the announcement of our next session, which is on a Tuesday, not a Monday. Take note. November 5th, on Jain mantras and theories of karma. So we have a trio of awesome speakers yet again. Christopher Emmerich from Toronto, then Ellen Goff of Emory University with her book Making a Mantra, relatively recently out. And then we have Kirsty Wiley, sort of closing of that trio. So this will be another really interesting session with speakers tackling similar topics, but from slightly different viewpoints in our by now, hopefully, kind of known and tested style. So don't forget to have a look at these future sessions. You can register on the website so we can remind you a couple of hours in advance that we're ready to start. And then I wish all of you a very good night or morning or afternoon, wherever you are. And I hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
very
much,
much.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In this together. Thank you.